I will start with my introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. I hope more people will join us. My name is Marty van Lieren. I am the program lead for the HMHB Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies Consortium, which is hosted by the Micronutrient Forum. We're aiming to drive collective action for improving maternal nutrition, and specifically in order to accelerate the introduction of multiple micronutrients supplements in settings where diets are poor and where indicators of maternal anemia or low birth weight are high, and where multiple micronutrient supplementation may have a significant improvement in maternal nutrition status. Today is our first of a series of coffee and chai chats with experts around various MMS-related topics. I think that the reason that you tuned in is because you have an interest in MMS. This week is specifically important because we have learned that a WHO expert committee has decided to include MMS into the WHO essential medicine list. We believe that that is a milestone for ensuring that women across many countries will have better accessibility to multiple micronutrient supplements in the near future. We at the Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies Consortium are very pleased to welcome you to this very first chat with Kalpana Beesabathuni. Kalpana is the global lead technology and innovation at Sight and Life. Kalpana, so great that you are willing to do this in our first chat, and we're looking forward to an engaging discussion. Now, you will talk about Sight and Life's supply readiness assessment tool for MMS. But before I give you the floor, I want to take everybody quickly through the format of this chat, some practical stuff. First, we'll let our speaker, Kalpana, talk very briefly about the topic with a few slides. And during this time, your mics, the audience mics, will be muted. But when she is done with the introduction, we will unmute everybody. Not that you start talking together, but that you will be able to ask questions and we can carry the discussion forward. Now, you can ask questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand by clicking on that button. And then, through the moderation, we will give you the floor if that is possible. But it is good if you can mute yourself during that question and answer session to avoid any background noise. And raise the hand so that we can still moderate it a bit. Once you're called upon to speak, you unmute yourself and ask your question, and then you mute yourself and you're done. I also would like you, for those that haven't done that, because we see a lot of Kalpanas, but please change the name if you can, so that we know who is there, and if possible, write your organization. And you can do that also, I think there is, with the 3 dots, you click on it and you can rename how you have entered this call. The total chat is 30 minutes. We would like to give everybody who is interested a chance to be part of the discussion. And if there's any technical difficulties, please type it in the chat. We have somebody who should be able to help us out there. And now, without any further ado, over to you, Kalpana. And you can unmute yourself. Please, Gurmeet, unmute Kalpana.
There you go. I'm able to unmute myself now. Thank you, Marty, for the very kind introduction. I'm very excited to see the lineup of speakers for these coffee chats. And I believe it's also being recorded, so it will also be widely available, especially at this time, at a very opportunistic time that WHO has included MMS in the essential medicines list, which means we're likely to see a lot of surge in demand for some of these topics that will be addressed by the countries. So today, like I said, I'll spend about 5 to 6 minutes just explaining what the tool is. I'll walk you through the tool that we developed for supply readiness, specifically for low and middle income countries, and it has been tested or used in more than 15 countries. This tool is available on our website as well as in the Sight and Life special report on MMS, which some of our colleagues, the link to which some of our colleagues will share in the chat box. So first question is, why was this tool developed in the first place? So as WHO and other stakeholders were trying to deliberate on switching from iron and folic acid to MMS, one of the key questions that was asked is, are the countries ready to either procure or produce MMS? So the objective of this toolkit is to determine whether MMS would need to be imported or produced in any given country for use in antenatal care programs. The second objective is to also assess the in-country capacity, whether they're able to procure ingredients and produce an MMS product that can either be delivered to the end consumer through a private sector approach or through institutional buyers such as the Ministry of Health. And the tool also provides guidance for actions that are needed to ensure competitive and affordable sources of MMS supply. And finally, to assess the impact of shifting from IFA to from import to local production of MMS or from IFA to MMS in countries and in regions. And in the next slide, what you will see is that specifically once you have finished using the tool for a given country, you will first be able to assess what does the production scenario look like for that country. And typically we find 4 types of scenarios in these countries. Scenario A is when a country is able to import straight raw materials or straight ingredients of vitamins and minerals. Then they're mixed and tableted or encapsulated and packaged by a local manufacturer. That's scenario A. In scenario B, a local manufacturer typically imports already a mix of vitamins and minerals, and the only thing that he has to do is tablet it or encapsulate it and package it locally. In scenario C, specifically where there is low pharmaceutical manufacturing capacity, producers usually import bulk or finished tablets or capsules of the multiple micronutrients and then locally package it and then distribute it. And finally is a scenario D, where there is such a low capacity to even package it in the country that the countries import the finished product directly for distribution. And once you assess the production scenario, especially in countries where already some form of supplements exist, you will be able to assess what the availability of those supplements is in the markets, what are the gaps and opportunities, what types of investment is required to improve procurement and production, look at the capabilities of local manufacturers. And finally, we will leave you with some tools and examples of regulation and policy to help support countries shift from IFA to MMS from a supply side perspective. And then, so what do we have? What sort of information do we have so far? So we've completed the readiness assessment in 17 countries and 4 are still in progress. We already have publications for most of these countries, and our colleagues will share the links to these publications in the chat box. And for the remaining countries where we haven't yet published they should be available in the public domain before end of Q1 next year. And when you go to the next slide, the tool, this is what you see here is the description of the tool or the analytical framework that we have used. It predominantly is categorized into 4 domains. We start with the desk research. The links to some of what could help desk research will be posted in the chat box. But besides the literature review, during desk research, we'll also look at existing databases, make some phone calls to key stakeholders for a given country, and make a plan for primary research and schedule interviews. This desk research is mainly to inform the approach and the directions one could take for the remaining domains. And the 3 remaining domains are market assessment, production assessment, and regulatory assessment. And in a market assessment, typically includes visiting markets, shops, pharmacies, clinics, and hospitals, looking at the existing products and benchmarking them against the approved UNIMMAP formulation for MMS, comparing their packaging, product price, but also how they're sold and how they're distributed. And if budget allows, it would be good to test the quality of these supplements that we would find in the markets, which includes not only looking for the content or the dosage of the vitamins and minerals, but also their shelf life and stability in hot and humid conditions, especially in low and middle income countries. And in the second or the third domain, you would do a production assessment where you would analyze the 4 production scenarios that I just described, explore what are the barriers and opportunities for each scenario and incentives for the producer. And finally, in the last domain, where you look at regulation and policy assessment, you would explore what are the favorable and unfavorable regulations, what needs to be done for the MMS to be on the national essential medicines list, now that it's already there in the WHO list, regulations around shelf life, label, product registration, but also marketing of the product. And finally, we will leave you with tools on what kind of funding is needed, investment, whether you need to explore subsidies, taxes, guarantees, and also look at trade agreements for the country to produce locally or procure MMS. And finally, a common question that I get is that how deep should the skills be? Does it require very specific skills for this assessment? No, the tool is designed, I would say no, because the tool is designed that anyone with general research skills should be able to understand how to use the tool and the questionnaires for key informant interviews. One should be able to have good communication and interpersonal skills to be able to do primary interviews, some level of analytical abilities to manage and analyze both the qualitative data that you get, but also quantitative data. And the quantitative data requires only basic statistical analysis. In the chat box, we will share with you a paper from Maternal and Child Nutrition where we provide some very basic statistical results of the quantitative data that you could get from such an analysis. And then some exposure to where you have an understanding of how market and manufacturing environments work would be useful, but it's not essential. So maybe, Marty, I would like to pause here and check with participants if there's a specific direction they would like to take from here or any questions that I could answer for them.
So this is the time where maybe people would like to raise a hand or ask a question. And while you're thinking about that, I mean, it would be great if for those that have a question, either write it in the chat or still think about it maybe. And I could ask also a question to Kalpana. Kalpana, because you are describing these 4 steps, and I know, I mean, that we have slides in more details on those 4 steps. So maybe that's something I can do, put up the slides back up, and then you talk us through those 4 steps. Shall we do that? Let's do that. I always have learned that if people don't say anything against me, then they approve. Okay, so here they are. Maybe unmute Kalpana again. Gurmeet, can Kalpana unmute herself or not?
Now I could unmute, yes. Thank you, Marty. Please feel free to ask your questions in the chat box while I walk you through the 4 domains. So the very first step, the desk research, is important. We always start with a literature review. Fortunately, we have quite a bit of information and findings from many countries, as posted in the links in the chat box. And once we have done that, the next step would be to access a publicly available database called the United Nations International Trade Statistics Database and the IMS Health Database. So both databases will help you understand if the country that you're exploring imports supplements or not. And then right after that, we have a detailed questionnaire in the special report, also in the link that's posted in the chat box. See if you can find answers from desk research to the questions in the questionnaire. And any gaps in information can be filled through primary interviews, which you would conduct in the second phase. Then the second phase, which is step 2 on the next slide, is about market assessment. Here, like I mentioned, before before you go to second phase, maybe I should explain the categories of supplements that you're likely to find in the markets. Typically, especially in countries where there's strong pharmaceutical manufacturing capacity and there are lots of supplements in the market, you will find that these multiple micronutrient supplements fall into any of these 4 categories. The first category is that at least the supplement that you find has at least or less than 10 vitamins and minerals and dosage that matches with the UNIMMAP formulation. And you would classify them as category 1. And I'll explain shortly why. And in category 2 would be at least 10 or more. And the dosage should have at least 80% of the dosage prescribed in the UNIMMAP. Then that supplement falls under category 2. And supplements that exactly match UNIMMAP formulation is category 3. And supplements with ingredients with dosage, not only with the UNIMMAP formulation, but sometimes they have additional nutrients such as DHA or other amino acids, and that would be category 4. The reason we came up with these 4 categories is because with these categories, you'll be able to assess or shortlist manufacturers that you can speak to. Typically, manufacturers who fall into category 1 would find it very difficult to produce a UNIMMAP formulation of the MMS. So if you have, say, 5 to 10 manufacturers and you've shortlisted them into these 4 categories, then I would say avoid going to manufacturers who fall into category 1. And the remaining manufacturers, I would say, systematically go through primary research and talk to each one of them to assess not only the interest, but what types of investment is required for them to take their current supplements, which fall into categories 2 to 4, to switch to the UNIMMAP formulation. Now we can go to the next slide where I'll walk you through the rest of the market assessment. So after you've collected the products and categorized them and benchmark them against UNIMMAP formulation, it would be useful to apply a 4P framework. A 4P marketing framework stands for product, price, promotion, and place. And in Insight and Life special report, we have some case studies and examples on how to use the 4P framework. And when you visit pharmacies, it would be useful to consider a mix of pharmacies for your research. There are public pharmacies, there are private pharmacies. Also visit pharmacies in low income neighborhoods. As an example, what I mean by public pharmacy is in India, the government of India runs a set of public pharmacies called Jan Aushadhi, which you typically find in low and middle income neighborhoods. And they have a lot of generic medicines, but also generic supplements. And so when you collect supplements, collecting it from a good mix of pharmacies would be useful to give you a robust assessment of the market. And once you've collected the supplements, you put to take the pictures of labels and then you put them in an Excel sheet and try to compare it with the UNIMMAP formulation. Again, we have an example in the Insight and Life special report on how to do benchmarking of these supplements and the labels that you collect. And then once step 2 is completed, you will be able to determine the affordability and the local manufacturing capabilities in your country. And that is when you'll also be able to know whether local brands are better or do you need to import MMS. And if budget permits, it will be useful also to do a laboratory analysis to determine the minerals and vitamins that you have seen in the market, whether they support the label claims that are present on the bottle. Then we come to the next domain, the production assessment. Here is when you go deeper into the 4 scenarios that I've just explained. And to go deeper into these 4 scenarios, you must shortlist a range of companies, small, medium, large, and multinational supplement manufacturers. You would need to meet with as many senior management, R&D, business development professionals in these companies, because they will help identify the barriers and opportunities, but also incentives and disincentives for each of the 4 production scenarios that you see on the slides. And once the interviews are done, you'll be able to develop a roadmap for conditions that need to be in place for local production of MMS. For example, we found scenarios A and B in countries such as Bangladesh, Indonesia, Colombia, Peru, and India, which already have a thriving branded supplement market. Whereas in low-income countries, it's most likely scenario C and scenario D are preferred because you do not see much pharmaceutical manufacturing or consumer demand in low-income countries. And finally, you would round off the assessment by looking at the final step or the final domain, which is the regulation and policy assessment. Specifically, this domain takes more time than the previous stages. And to get a complete and comprehensive information, you need to interview as many experts as possible that you can find both in the public sector, the private sector, and the regulatory bodies in a given country. You will be able to identify several upstream policy enablers that can enable local production. You need to have discussions on what it takes to have MMS on the national essential medicines list, because having MMS under the national essential medicines list has a lot of advantages. It gives MMS public health importance, and governments will prioritize resources for shaping both market supply but also demand. It will also enable easier clearance of supply at the port, whether it's ingredients or the finished product. And priority is given for government storage at central medical stores. Also, it enables national governments to consider downstream or consumer-friendly policies together with upstream, which can encourage manufacturers to bring to market an affordable MMS. For example, examples of downstream policies include subsidies. For example, in the US, there are vouchers for supplements, or sometimes supplements, there's free access for supplements through clinics. And in terms of upstream policies that can improve affordability of MMS, you'll find in countries such as India, there's a price ceiling on both the ingredients as well as the finished product. So having a price ceiling means that the manufacturers are forced to make the MMS available at an affordable price for government procurement. Another upstream policy are import subsidies or tax exemption on supplements, which we see in Bangladesh and Peru, which have zero taxes for local MMS producers. So with that, Marty, I think I'd stop the assessment of the tool and would love to hear feedback, more questions, but also share what's in the pipeline in the future for supply readiness.
Yeah, and I am looking at the chat. I have not yet seen a question, but I think your presentation is really clear. Would be nice if there's somebody who says, I have a question because in my country, I would like to know more. Alternatively, I don't know, Kalpana, if there's an example.
I think there's one question. Yeah, yeah, I can give examples. Should I answer the question in the chat box?
Yes, please. Yes. Yeah.
So the question is, are there any recommendations for price ceilings for MMS? Yes, there are recommendations, and it depends on the country. Among those 4 scenarios, countries which fall under scenario A that have significant pharmaceutical capacity to produce MMS is where price ceilings would actually work. It would not work in the other scenarios. Here, price ceiling helps mostly in government procurement more than for market-based models. And how do we look at price ceilings? We have more information on that coming up in the toolkit that we're jointly developing with UNICEF that will be in the public domain before the end of the year. And a short answer to that question is that one needs to consider price ceiling for a manufacturer or a manufacturing capacity who can make at least 50 million tablets a year. And that translates to around nearly 300,000 pregnant women a year. If it falls anything, if you see demand is anything less than 300,000 pregnant women, it does not make sense to have a price ceiling. But for countries which have millions of pregnant women, there it makes sense to have a price ceiling, because otherwise there's no incentive for a manufacturer to produce a high quality, a good quality MMS product in the country. Thank you, Ruchita, for the question.
new question she has. What possible incentives can be given to manufacturers to produce MMS?
Great, that's a great question. I think the first and more they look at is the import duty on raw materials is very high in many countries. A lot of countries such as Peru and Bangladesh, for example, have very low import taxes for those who are import taxes on the raw materials, so that it would encourage local production and they can stay competent with or be competitive with the global manufacturers. So that's a simple answer. And besides that, some countries have subsidies if they want to set up a new production line or infrastructure. And some countries give guaranteed demand for at least for government procurement for public health channels. So these are at least examples that we already see in the countries, and looking forward to assessing if there are more out there.
Maybe I have a question as well. What are the countries where you already see local manufacturing of the UNIMMAP MMS? I mean, low and middle income countries. I'm not talking about US or Europe.
Yeah, among low and middle income countries, Bangladesh has just launched a product 2 months ago, a company called Renata. And the product is for a social marketing company. It's called Full Care. It's been launched 2 months ago. And the next country that will be launching a product would be South Africa by DSM.
Right. And is the South African, so the product that South Africa produced a couple of years ago was not a UNIMMAP formulation, or was it?
It was very much a UNIMMAP formulation, except for, I think, I can't remember, one of the ingredients was slightly different, but it's very close to the UNIMMAP formulation. That was until 2016, and then there was a change in guidelines, and now it's back on, South Africa is again back on track, and you will soon see a UNIMMAP formulation emerging from a locally produced company in South Africa.
Excellent. I think this is really great. I'm also very happy to hear that the tool will be ready, hopefully by the end of this year. I know it will be on Sight and Live's website, and if you allow, we will put it on the Knowledge Hub of the Healthy Mothers, or the link at least, on the Knowledge Hub of the Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies Consortium. I do think that with the 17 plus the ongoing countries, so the 17 assessments in countries that have been done and ongoing, you must have an incredible, good view on what is possible, what is not possible. If there's anybody who thinks, well, we need to do this in another country, what is the next step? Do you think that the tool as such is enough? Is there anything that Sight and Live is planning to do to accompany the tool?
Yes, now as soon as we publish, I think Shannon's also asked a question about what is this new tool. It's a new toolkit. It's a more detailed assessment of supply readiness. We already have the first version published in the special report. Shannon, what I'm talking about is a much more detailed toolkit together with UNICEF. That's been, the first draft has been done, and for the end of the year, the new tool, the revised toolkit will be published. The difference is that it'll have a lot, the new revised toolkit will have a lot of examples that we have collected from the countries, but also the questions that countries have asked in terms of local production. All those questions have been answered in this new toolkit, which will be published in the public domain before the end of this year. And then Marty, coming back to your question about synthesis from all of the countries, that's in the pipeline, it's in the works. And I'm hoping we will be able to revisit that together with you and Healthy Babies and Healthy Mothers Consortium before end of Q1 next year.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well. And I do think that the new toolkit will have then also the questionnaires or the different formats on how, let's say, to help, let's say, teams in countries to do this in case there's not yet been done an assessment done by you or others in that country. I can see we're at the 30 minutes. It's a very quick overview of the work. It's to give everybody a taste of what is there. Thank you for the questions. Next time I'm really gonna encourage everybody, have your questions ready before even coming online. You know, people are here to answer your live questions. But for me, this was a very great first coffee and chai chat. For me, the coffee, maybe for Kalpana, the chai. And just for you to know that we have just confirmed an additional expert chat, which we will have to plan in on the 15th of October next week, with Dr. Hema Divakar from India. She is a maternal health expert. Actually, I think she's a gynecologist, very interested in not only maternal health, but also maternal nutrition. And she was a former president, I believe, of FOXY, which I don't know what the abbreviation stands for, except that it's the Indian chapter of the Federation of Gynecologists and Obstetricians. And she will discuss in a dialogue with Saskia Ozendarp, who's the executive director of the Micronutrient Forum, about the issues and the linkages between maternal health, maternal nutrition, but not so much the evidence, etc., but more about what do we need to do to really work better together to move forward our agenda. And then the third coffee and chai chat will be on the 19th of October, and that will be Dr. Sulfikar Bhutta, who will talk to the evidence behind MMS, the scientific evidence. Of course, it would have been nice if we could have started with him, but I'm sure that, you know, I asked Kalpana to not talk about the evidence because that chat is planned in 2 weeks' time. All these moments and times will be on the website. You have already registered. We will send out more social media messages around that so that you see and can choose which ones you would like to attend. And we're looking forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you very much, Kalpana, and thank you for everybody who joined us.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.